So here I am, laying in bed a few days before Christmas, and I guess I hated myself on this particular day because I was scrolling through YouTube Shorts. Not something any sane man would be doing, but believe it or not, this actually turned out well, as I came across a video about a new horror game called Miside, which instantly caught my attention. From what I'd seen, Miside was about being trapped in a game by a sentient yandere AI, so I was expecting something like Doki Doki Literature Club or Susan the Real Girl, but what I wasn't expecting was for the game to actually be very scary. I thought I'd get jump scared a few times and then get back to simping, but the fact that I'm making this video means that clearly wasn't the case. This game shook me so much that I had to pause and take a breather after I got hit with a jump scare so intense, my soul almost left my body. And at this point, I'd barely scratched the surface of this game. Hell, I'd been playing for like half an hour at this point, and knowing this made me a little nervous. But more than anything, I was excited. I instantly grabbed my phone and watched one or two brain rot reels and then messaged my friend telling him all about my new autistic obsession. Anyway, I've been glazing it for long enough now. I think you can tell that I like this game, but I should probably explain why. So it's time to talk about Miside. The game starts with our very handsome and generic looking protag in his room, which doesn't look all that great. From his room, we can immediately infer that our protagonist is not living life to the fullest, and that's not because he's got a magazine with a Wojak on it. His bin is overflowing with trash, and his desk is covered in eaten cups of pot noodle. But worst of all is the elephant tranquilizer bottles. I watched Queen's Gambit recently, and even the girl from that wasn't taking shit like this, so it's safe to say our boy ain't exactly in the best of places. Which is probably why he becomes so obsessed with Miside, a game about helping your virtual girlfriend Mita with everyday tasks, like cooking dinner, finding her hairbrush, and moving furniture. But despite how the protagonist may perceive this game, something is blatantly wrong with it. When you open Mita's oven, you'll find a full-on chainsaw. Now, first of all, why was it in the oven of all places? And second of all, why does she have a chainsaw? I'm assuming Mita's not got a side hustle as a lumberjack, so this is pretty incriminating. But I guess our protag doesn't care, because he keeps playing the game for quite a while. Until eventually, Mita decides she wants to meet in person, which shouldn't be possible, but after putting the phone down and looking around for a moment, we can very clearly see that we're now inside the game. Only, Mita is nowhere to be found, and her room has some weird teleportation device in it, which is likely how she transported us into the game. But even though Miside is full of weird stuff like this, I still don't understand how she was able to teleport the player inside the game. It would appear the player's body was wholly transported into Miside, but I think it's more likely that the player had their mind trapped inside the game. I've not really got any proof of this, but unless we're assuming that the world of Miside takes place in the far future, or that Mita just has access to knowledge that is beyond all of our puny mortal brains, then Mita teleporting the player into the game would be impossible. Even the player's mind being trapped in Miside is a bit of a stretch, but I think it's far more likely in comparison to Mita literally inventing teleportation. After exploring Mita's house for some time, it'll become obvious that we're in the wrong version of the game, so we'll need to use her teleportation device to try and get to the right one, which doesn't go too well. We're teleported to another version of the game, however it's even worse than before. Mita is still missing, only this time the entirety of her house is shrouded in darkness. But worse than that is the mysterious figure who starts haunting our protag. Knocking can be heard from multiple windows all over the house, and messages like "wanna play" and "who are you" can be seen covering the walls. But who's leaving these cryptic notes? Well, there's only one person that it could be. Mita, right? But why would Mita do something like this? Despite her somewhat suspicious hiding of a chainsaw, she does truly care for the player. So Mita has no reason to torment the protag in such a way. So who's doing this? Well, that, my friend, would be Mita. After finding the first power cell needed to reactivate the teleportation device, we'll be met with an extremely long corridor with a cracked door right at the end of it. While making our way through this corridor, a figure standing behind the door will become ever more visible. This person is Mita, however she's not the one we've come to know. Most players will probably miss this on their first playthrough of Miside because she's not exactly easy to see, but if you're observant, you'll notice this version of Mita not only has shorter hair, but is also wearing a blue headband. Her appearance might sound similar, and that's because we've seen her already in the pictures littered all around the first version of the house our protag finds himself in, and the house he's currently in. But I'm gonna finish talking about this version of Mita for now, because at the moment it doesn't make too much sense. Anyway, once we've collected every power cell, we can use Mita's teleportation device again, but this time it's going to take our poor protagonist to the right version, which means it's finally time to meet Mita. The right one this time, although we'll soon wish we hadn't. Like, straight away, she attempts to give us a heart attack by appearing out of nowhere behind the player. This gets almost everyone I've seen that's played Miside, except for XQC. I'm assuming he was more focused on the keys jingling above the camera, but all jokes aside, she is actually quite nice. Mita is more than willing to answer any of your questions, and even though some of her answers are a little concerning, like the fact that she's been watching the protagonist while he works at his computer, but even if she is truly apologetic over some of her actions, the feeling that something is wrong never seems to slip. Even though Mita seems like some form of angel and her house appears to be some form of paradise, the feeling that something is wrong constantly nagging at you makes you incredibly weary of everything. Something as innocent as Mita bashfully peeking at you from behind a door turns into something far more sinister as your paranoia continues to rise. Also, the game's strange mechanics are really good at managing to build onto this growing sense of discomfort. Miside uses the fact that it takes place in a game to the best of its ability. A lot of games, despite being so distant from reality, still have to bend to real-world logic in order to make the world it's based in believable to the player. But Miside doesn't have to. Anything weird that happens in the game can simply be chalked up to "it's a game," which gives Miside an incredible amount of freedom. But the only weird happenings at the moment are things like food appearing out of thin air and screws putting themselves back in place, so nothing too crazy at the moment, but trust me when I say this game is going to get pretty weird. Once we've had food with Mita, the protagonist will begin glitching out, but apparently Mita knows what's happening, so after a quick walk to the bathroom, we're given some pills. Which, I mean, is pretty concerning. I don't know about everyone watching, but if I was given pills by anyone other than a doctor, I highly doubt I'd take them. But I suppose in this situation, there isn't any other choice, so our protag is about to have one crazy trip. Or maybe not, because he wakes up after like half a minute. Although, upon waking up, things are getting very weird, and sadly it's not because we're high. Mita has changed the layout of her house, and even though she says it's to make us feel more at home, I personally think she had a different objective in mind. She has basically no reason to change the layout. The protagonist even admits they're getting used to the house, so why did she? Well, I personally think it was a display of her own strength. Mita has complete and utter control over the world we're in, so by showing that she can change the environment by basically clicking her fingers, it shows us how helpless we really are. But she has no reason to harm us, so it's time to play some video games. I really like this section of Miside, because it builds so well towards what comes next. At the moment, we're just spending some time with Mita, and I'll be honest, it's pretty fun. Even though I have raged at Mita in the past after she's bodied me in both Dairy Scandal and Penguin Piles, I really do enjoy playing video games with her. But of course, this being a horror game means these happy times are not going to last. Once you've gone ahead and played video games with Mita, you can head to her room and play cards. Now there's a few issues here, first of which being the teleportation device, or lack thereof. Upon asking Mita where it is, she just admits to having moved it, because apparently we're not going to need it anymore, implying that she has no intention of letting us leave, but more concerning than that is her wardrobe. While playing cards, a knocking can be heard coming from the wardrobe in the corner of the room, which when questioned about, Mita becomes very defensive. but we'll come back to that in just a moment because I want to talk about the music in Miside. As we're playing cards with Mita, the music begins distorting slightly, kind of like what Doki Doki Literature Club does anytime something weird happens. However, in the case of Miside, the music is uncomfortable even when everything is completely fine. Honestly, this could just be a me thing, but I was really unsettled by the music in this game. It reminded me of both the Donkey Kong Country aquatic ambience in its dreamlike nature. And the music from a show called The Last Man on Earth. This show is not very popular, so I'm assuming a lot of you watching have not seen it, but that's alright, because I've been looking for an excuse to talk about it for a while now, so I'll explain what it is for all of you. The Last Man on Earth is a comedy series created by Will Forte, and it's one of the funniest series I've ever watched, so I urge all of you to go and watch it, after you finish watching this video, of course. The show is about a man named Phil Miller who believes himself to be the last man on Earth, after a terrible virus breaks out. This is until he meets a woman named Carol Pulbasian. After this, they continue to find more and more people as the series goes on. All of them are very funny, but despite this being a comedy, Will Forte manages to mix in these really eerie moments that are amplified by the soundtrack. Heavy spoiler warning here for anyone who wants to watch the show, but there's a part of Season 4 that I just have to talk about, because it left poor 11-year-old me in a constant state of panic for about 2 days straight. In Season 4, the main cast are out searching for a boy named Jasper, and after hearing a siren coming from the local prison, they make their way there assuming that it was Jasper who set it off, only to find a prison guard named Carl, who we the viewer know to be a cannibal. Over the next few episodes, multiple characters come very close to dying as Carl grapples with his inner demons. These episodes are equally as funny as they are terrifying, and for some strange reason, the Miside soundtrack really reminded me of them in particular. Anyway, I'm very sorry for going on that absolutely mental shill, so let's continue with Miside, shall we? When attempting to investigate the wardrobe, Mila will give you a choice, either continue your investigation or stay with her. Now, I am not lying when I say I was stuck on this decision for about 10 minutes. Not because I was having trouble deciding, mind you, I didn't have a choice. You can only choose to stay with Mila if you've beaten the game, so I was simply sitting there, dreading what was to come next, as despite having a YouTube channel that talks about horror fairly regularly, I happen to be a massive pussy. No, it doesn't make sense. I have an obsession with horror, yet I'm very easily scared. I've been wondering why I'm like this for most of my life, and I never did quite come to an answer. But it's safe to say, I was not looking forward to what I was going to do, and I was probably right to think that way, cause Mita is one scary bitch. After deciding to open the wardrobe, Mita clicks her fingers before all the lights in her house turn off, and we get a glimpse of what exactly was in her wardrobe. A door, but it's locked at the moment, so we'll come back to that after we talk about that jump scare. In the kitchen, you'll be able to find a flashlight, every horror game's best friend, but after picking it up, the bathroom door will open on its own, displaying someone who has game-ended themselves.
Well, I don't need you. I'll game-end him myself.
Which really took me off guard. I knew this game was probably going to draw a few similarities from Doki Doki, but that's not something I thought they'd use. Also, I want to say this, the developers of Miside, Ohayou, I think I'm pronouncing that right, are utterly evil. See, I was nervous to walk towards this hanging body, so I was sort of inching my way towards it, slowly but surely, only to be hit with possibly the worst jump scare I've ever seen. But I learned later on that this very jump scare only happens if you're too much of a pussy to just run straight towards the door. So I was basically punished for being a coward. And if that wasn't bad enough, the pause menu will switch from the usually quite cheerful and hopeful melody to this awful echoey droning sound. That feels reminiscent of those creepy discs you can find in Minecraft. So, here's a little gift tailored just for the devs. Mita's behaviour during this part of the game really confused me. After going in the bathroom and seeing somebody's fingers get chopped off, we'll be able to spot Mita grabbing a knife in the kitchen. although at no point does she ever really use it. Mita gives us a little jump scare, but it doesn't really lead to anything, so I'm assuming this whole segment of Miside is just a farce. Mita is fully capable of killing the protagonist whenever she wants, only she doesn't, making me think that she's just toying with us. It's possible that at some point during Miside, Mita truly does lose control over the situation, but so long as we're in her version of the game, she can just mess with us for as long as she'd like. However, she's not going to have control for too much longer. After the lower half of Mita's body guides us to her room, we'll be able to find the basement key. And guess who's in the basement? It's Mita, of course. I mean, who else could it possibly be? But it's not the Mita we know. First of all, her hair hasn't been put up into a ponytail, and her subtitles are a different colour. Also, the fact that she's in a cage might have made that pretty obvious, but I need to talk about character design because I think it's important, so there. By now, you're probably all aware we're going to be seeing quite a few different Mitas throughout the game, all of which having their own individual personalities and designs, but despite that, they're all Mita. So you'd think it would start getting hard to tell them apart from one another, but surprisingly, it doesn't. Each Mita isn't determined by their looks so much as they are personality. This will become more prevalent later, but I wanted to touch on it now because I do think it's impressive that they were able to make each different Mita easily discernible from one another. Anyway, to make things clear, the Mita we're currently in the presence of is Kind Mita, the Mita who was chasing us around before is Crazy Mita, hence the thumbnail, and the Mita we encounter after being sent to the wrong version of the game, well, don't worry about her. I'll talk about her again eventually, but it wouldn't make sense right now, so let's focus on Kind Mita, who gives us a ring. This ring will guide us through the different versions of Miside, although before we can leave the one we're currently in, we'll need to hide. Crazy Mita makes her way into the basement and begins searching for us, so we'll have to hide until given an opportunity to escape, which means it's stealth time. And even though it's not the best stealth segment in the world, it's very short and the last time you'll be doing any sneaking. Something my impatient little toddler brain was very happy about. I swear, if this game was full of stealth segments, it probably would have taken me like double the time to complete. I've been playing video games since I was like 4, and yet every time I encounter a stealth segment, my silly little brain always thinks that just making a mad dash will go well, and it never does, so thank you developers. You may have almost given me a heart attack, but at least you didn't force me to be crouched for a good 50% of the game. As a reward, have an upvote. Upon escaping the basement, we'll find ourselves in a very unfinished game environment, or maybe broken is a better way to describe it. There is absolutely no reason for this place to exist in a game like Miside that is supposed to focus on you spending quality time with the ever-lovely Mita. So why does it? Well, it's possible that Mita is able to control the world outside of her own house, but it's unlikely. I think the world is more like its own sentient entity trying to mimic reality, using what little game assets it has at its disposal, resulting in this really uncanny and artificial feeling world you could easily describe as liminal. But unlike a lot of liminal spaces, we're not alone here. After wandering around for a bit, we'll encounter another player who happens to be bleeding quite a bit, and after talking with him, we learn that he's one of Mita's victims. Now, the game doesn't really specify which Mita did this to him, but it was probably Crazy Mita. I mean, come on, who else could stab someone in the gut yet still have them simping so badly? No one, I tell you, no one but her. Although, not everyone is simping. After leaving Blondie, we'll find ourselves in a room full of tiny people, resembling Mita's chibi self. Miside doesn't really explain why they're like this, but if I were to guess, I'd assume they're all copies of other players that aren't fully aware of their situation. Except for one of them, that is, whose nonsensical ramblings are much darker than the others. They won't even move when you approach them, instead choosing to stay curled up in a ball, which really does make you feel bad for them, but there's nothing you can do. We never see any of these people again, so their fate is likely already sealed by the time we find them. But our protagonist can't stop here, so we push forward and eventually come across Kind Mita again. However, we'll talk to her in just a moment, because it's currently gamer time. In the same room as Kind Mita, we can also find an arcade machine called Space Racer. The game has absolutely nothing to do with the story from what I could tell, but damn if it ain't fun. So I just had to mention it, and this won't be the last time either. There's multiple silly little arcade games dotted all over my side, and almost every one of them is really, really fun. Anyway, back to KindMeter, who is about to introduce us to possibly the most epic character of the decade. KindMeter has a plan to both stop Crazy Meter and help our protagonist escape, but if we're going to achieve such a thing, we'll need help. So everyone, please welcome Cool Meter, or as she's more commonly known, Cappy, the greatest character in my side. Only, she's not all there, I'm afraid. Crazy Meter has gotten to poor Cappy and killed her, which has basically led to her respawning with none of her memories. As unlike us, meters cannot die, they can only be reset. So even though Cappy has somewhat lost all of her usefulness, she's still really cool and easily the best guitarist in history. Due to Cappy being crit one-shot by Crazy Meter, KindMeter has to set a specific route to the core, a place I forgot to mention, but it's basically where we'll be able to stop Crazy Meter by resetting her. And while waiting for KindMeter to set everything up, we're left to play with Cappy. We're able to play 2 different games with her, first of which is the button, which basically revolves around pressing a button and whacking the other person over the head, but more important than that is Cappy's inventory. I think most people who've played my side can agree they didn't expect Cappy to pull a microphone out of her inventory, unless they knew it was going to happen beforehand. This is possibly the most iconic Cappy moment. But this isn't the end of our time with Cappy, we also get to play a rhythm game with her, and I'm pretty bad at this one. You've got Cappy not missing a single note, and then you've got me barely coming anywhere near her score. But at least this carnage doesn't last too long, because it's time to leave the safety of Cappy's house. Now that KindMeter has planned our new route, we say goodbye to her and Cappy before making our way through the many terrifying and broken versions of my side, with the first one we find ourselves in being a looping corridor, infested with these odd spider-like creatures with human heads, that'll eventually begin blocking your path, leaving us with only one option, and it's called violence. A baseball bat smashes right through one of the windows in the corridor, meaning we finally got a way of defending ourselves, but not for very long. After using this bat like 3 times, we lose it and we don't get any other form of weapon for the rest of the game, so if anything, the baseball bat was more trouble than it was worth, because now the window it came through keeps swinging open in the wind, creating this very uncomfortable ambient banging noise. So you know what, devs? I'm taking away your upvote. This version of my side, despite being very weird, still has its own meter, and I'd argue they're probably the most interesting character in the game. No offense to the fabulous Cappy, but the meter we find here really does make the story of my side a lot darker than it appears on the surface. So which meter am I talking about? Well, that would be Tiny Meter, a small, badly injured little girl with a horn growing out of her head that immediately had alarm bells ringing in my mind the second I saw her. And that's not because I knew what the internet would do, it was the fact that she's a literal child version of Meter. That's what struck me as odd, but why? What's so wrong with a child version of a character? Well, if I'm not mistaken, the game My Side and the world the game takes place in is supposed to essentially be a dating simulator about dating a girl called Meter. So the implication of this tiny Meter's existence is that the developers of My Side are pretty dodgy. Not the real ones, I want to make that very clear. I know it might be a little hard to follow, but I'm talking about the developers of the game we get trapped in during My Side. I realize that may have been lost in translation because the game I'm talking about is called My Side, and the game we're stuck inside of is also called My Side. Like, devs, you couldn't have made this easier by calling the fake game something like Meter's Love Fantasy. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. Back to Tiny Meter, who says some pretty concerning stuff while talking to her that left me somewhat scratching my head in confusion. She'll make reference to another player when speaking, and the way she describes them makes it sound like they were responsible for her injuries, but that can't be the case. See, every single one of the meters have their own character profile thingy, and in tiny meters we can read that Crazy Meter was the one that harmed her, which makes sense. How could a player do such irreversible damage to a meter? Yet it still left me in complete disarray ever since I came up with this theory of mine. I don't understand what reason Crazy Meter would have to do such a thing. Despite her being absolutely insane, she doesn't attack others at random, so Tiny Meter would have had to upset her, but I can't think of anything this poor little girl could have done that was so bad that Crazy Meter would believe it necessary to quite literally deform her. So before I start driving myself insane trying to figure out a reason for all this, we're just gonna move on with the story. After refusing to become Tiny Meter's friend, which I didn't even want to do by the way, we'll begin getting chased by this giant spider creature while jet black arms reach out from the walls trying to grab us. But whatever these things are doesn't matter, I'm more interested in how they act. These creatures' only interest is the protagonist, choosing to completely ignore Tiny Meter, which kind of gives off the impression that she summoned them. After all, she just wants you to stay and be her friend, so one of the monsters being an arm that's sole goal is to try and hold you in place does seem like it could be an extension of her. Although, the spider is a different story. I ain't got any idea what's going on with him. It's possible that he's connected to Tiny Meter, but it's unlikely, as when he catches you it would appear that he kills you. And I really don't think Tiny Meter would want such a thing. I suppose it could be that this corridor is also a time loop, which could mean that Tiny Meter is actually dying every time and getting revived when we restart the corridor, but it's unlikely, and I'd rather not believe that. Tiny Meter has been through enough already. Anyway, we can escape by jumping out one of the windows in the corridor, but our next destination isn't going to be much better, I'm afraid. Upon reaching the next version of Miside, we'll meet another meter, this one being Chibi Meter. Sadly, she doesn't stick around for very long, but the same cannot be said about her sister. After leaving Chibi Meter, we'll enter a pitch-black room full of different meters that hide their faces when you approach them. That said, we can easily see that some of them are identical to meters we've already come across. But how? Why are there essentially duplicates of almost every single meter? Well, to answer that question is Shorthead Meter, who I both talked about and didn't talk about. Are you confused yet? Good, you should be. Shorthead Meter informs us that for every person who downloads Miside, another meter will be made, and another world along with her, which means there can be multiple of each meter and each version, which explains all those meters from before. They were all newly made meters that aren't yet ready to be with a player, so they stay in this version where Shorthead Meter can take care of them. This also explains why we see Shorthead Meter all the way at the beginning of the game. She was another version of the meter we're currently with, and apparently this other version of Shorthead Meter is a bully that has trouble remembering things. It's a very minor detail, but I thought it was worth mentioning because at least it gives us a reason as to why she was messing with us earlier. But moving on now, as I'm sure that some of you must be wondering, who even makes all of these meters? Well, it's likely Shorthead Meter, as she's the one who introduces the protagonist to the arcade game Dummy Sort, a game used to turn dummies into meters by basically giving them their skin. However, not all of them are fit to become meters, so before they can even be given their flesh, you'll have to get rid of them. But throwing them away won't erase them from existence, they'll just be left to wander the labyrinth of Miside with no player to keep them company. It's honestly quite sad when you really think about it, but I doubt you'll be pitying them for very long. These dummies are Miside's attempt at the Weeping Angel style of enemy, which, for those of you who aren't aware, means they can only move while you're not looking at them. A pretty common enemy type in horror games, and one that never fails to scare me shitless, but even though they had the right effect, there's really not much I can say about them. It's not even that I don't enjoy enemies like this, there's just nothing I can really say about them that's not already blatantly obvious. However, the environment design of this section is incredible. Miside's developers, the real ones, clearly took some inspiration from Jared Pike's Dream Pools, a series of liminal space images that depict impossible environments based around the work of French architect Alain Capillaries from the 1970s. But unlike Pike's work, this part of Miside is much darker. The dream pools are bright, beautiful environments that evoke this sense of warmth and comfort. but the same cannot be said about Miside. The area we currently find ourselves in has this very sickly lighting, making the whole place look almost rotten, and with how it's designed it feels very much like a lab opposed to an actual pool, which I think fits very well with the dummies. They're basically unused game assets, so having them be in this very experimental seeming environment makes a whole lot of sense. Also, and this might be completely wrong, but I think it's sort of interesting, the way we escape this version of Miside is by climbing up a ladder away from all of the dummies. This ladder is surrounded by a golden light that freezes any dummy that comes in contact with it, which seems like a safety measure the devs of this game put in place to stop the dummies from getting out of hand, making them really appear like dangerous experiments that need to be kept in check. Which I realize doesn't make too much sense. I mean, why would the developers feel the need to quarantine something that's not even real? Well, I may have a plausible theory for this, which I'll talk about in just a moment, but firstly we need to move on to the next version. After finding our way out of the dummies version of Miside, we'll find this large open environment with a moon looming above, which will probably surprise a lot of players when they see it for the first time, because up until this point we've primarily been inside. This is the first, and I believe only time we're going to be outdoors during Miside, and it's really strange. The whole world is covered in this thick fog with only the fractured moon visible off in the distance. And to be fair, that doesn't sound too bad. I mean, I basically just described your average day in Britain after all. But I think the main reason it feels so odd is really down to the catwalks. Catwalks are primarily used in an industrial environment, and given that we can find more dummies all contained in steel capsules, I'd assume this place isn't meant for the players, it's more likely intended for the developers to manufacture new meters. Which sounds really weird when I say it out loud. Miside is a very weird game, so saying it's weird does feel a little obvious, but it needs to be said because this specific area has completely fried my brain. When I started writing this script, I wanted to try and understand why this game does the things it does. Why is this dating game full of horrifying monsters, abstract environments, and absolutely mental mechanics? Well, at first, I sort of chalked up every weird happening to a glitch in the game, but I don't believe that to be the case anymore. Some of these places that we ventured through do seem to serve a purpose, so it's entirely possible they were made intentionally. So my current belief is the developers of Miside, not the real ones, are not just attempting to make a game, but to experiment with highly capable artificial life, in the form of meters. My only basis for this theory is that even if all the events of Miside take place in a game, that doesn't mean anything can happen. I could easily write off some place as nothing more than a broken environment, but that logic can only get you so far. These broken segments of the game still sort of resemble Miside with their bright color palette and cutesy decorations, but that doesn't apply to all of them. The area we're currently in, and hell, the pool-like one as well, do not fit the style of Miside even slightly. Games can't just create random assets out of thin air. There is such a thing as procedural generation, where games create more content on their own. It's how games like Minecraft can create infinitely sprawling worlds. But Minecraft can only create more content using what the developers have already supplied it with. So the only way this could be possible is if the devs purposely programmed stuff like this in to experiment with the meters. Or, and I think this is much more likely, Miside is far more advanced than your average game. We've already seen their rogue AI invent some type of teleportation, so the developers of Miside creating a game that can make completely new content all on its own really doesn't sound that far-fetched. Although, that does make me wonder why the game would create such places. Just because it can create whatever it wants doesn't mean it would, so the devs probably still had some control over the game. Why they wanted places like these in their dating game though, I don't know. Again, I have no solid proof of this theory, I'm quite literally just going out on a whim here. For all I know, none of this actually has any meaning and it's all just less spooky locations and I've been going in circles for no reason. So before I go insane, let's just move on and talk about the fridge. While exploring the outside world of Miside, we'll almost get crushed by a fridge pushed down by yet another meter, and one I don't actually have a name for. She has the same hairstyle and text color as Crazy Meter, also, judging from the fact she almost killed us, a lot of players will probably assume them to be the same person, but I'm not sure if they are. I feel like it's supposed to be an example of how there are multiple different meters. Wait. Why am I even bothering with this stupid discussion? We all know what everyone was looking at here, you dirty, dirty bastards. After heading back inside, we'll find ourselves in the railway, which can be used to transport us to another version of Miside, but before that, it's time for another arcade game intermission. Hitor is the next arcade game we can play in Miside, which has us playing as Demon Meter, while gunning down all manner of monsters. Now, I'm not entirely sure of this one, but it's possible. I believe that Hitor's gameplay was based off of the game Doom. Again, I cannot be sure of this because I've never actually played Doom, but if it's anything like Hitor, then I'll probably end up playing it soon. Anyway, once we've used the railway, we can enter another version of Miside made up of only one room. In that room, we'll encounter yet another meter, this one being Ghostly Meter. She's a shadowy figure unable to see the world around her, but with our help, we can somewhat fix her. By looking around Ghostly Meter's room, we can uncover pieces of paper that when put together will depict another meter, only this one has had their face completely scribbled out. However, that doesn't mean we don't know the identity of this meter. It's obviously Ghostly Meter. I mean, you don't need a degree in rocket science to figure that out. The picture is in her room, the drawing on the paper clearly resembles her silhouette, so I'm not going to do any of this "oh, but who could it be" nonsense, because let's face it, you all know who it is. So after gluing the pieces back together, we can hand it over to Ghostly Meter and she'll begin looking like the photo. But there's still one big issue with her, and that's the fact that she's missing her face, just like in the picture. We can talk to her for a brief moment, and in that time she does refer to the person who did this to her. And even though she doesn't actually give us a name, it's most likely Crazy Meter. I don't know why she decided to take Ghostly Meter's face away instead of killing her, but it was likely an act of jealousy. If there's one thing we learn about Crazy Meter other than the fact that she's crazy, it's that she's obsessed with the concept of love. And when she sees any other meter getting close to a player, she takes out her anger on them, and in some cases decides to mutilate them instead of simply killing them and therefore resetting them to their original state. It's possible she does this in order to stop them from being with a player ever again, but if that's the case, why wouldn't she have tried to destroy Cappy, who is by far the most lovable character in the entire game? If anyone was going to get another player, it would be her, yet Crazy Meter only resets her. Was she worried we'd reach Cappy before she had time to do any permanent damage? Couldn't be, she'd just kill the protagonist and Kind Meter along with him. So maybe Crazy Meter believed that no matter what state Cappy was in physically, she'd still be a problem so long as she had her memories, but I think that's a bit of a stretch. I mean, I don't know about everyone watching, but I don't think I'd be very productive if I didn't have a face. Which begs the question, what makes Cappy so different from the others that Crazy Meter has attacked? Well, that's a good question, but sadly one that I don't have an answer to. I have literally zero idea why Crazy Meter decides to mutilate some of her victims and just kill the others. No idea in the slightest. We might come back to this topic, we might not, but for the time being, there's nothing further I can say here, so let's talk about some more dummies. We're able to exit Ghostly Meter's room via the wardrobe, and the second we do, we'll be met with a huge pile of dummies laying on the floor. Thankfully, only one of those dummies will come to life, but that's not to say there aren't any others. There are plenty of dummies lying in wait to pounce at you throughout these tight corridors, and unlike before, running past them is now completely impossible. They're placed so that when you eventually turn to look at them, they'll be only inches from the screen, but if you just try to ignore them and keep on running, then you will get caught, so you'll be jump scared either way. Luckily, this is a very small section of the game, so I was able to leave without having another out-of-body experience, and I'm actually pretty safe for the next few versions of Miside. The next 3 versions and the meters that preside within them are mostly quite normal. I mean, yeah, there's some strange stuff that happens, but it really is just because we're inside of a game. So even though I do like all of these different meters, I'm gonna speedrun this shit, as I've just noticed how massive this script is, and if I'd like to finish it anytime soon, I'm gonna have to make some cuts. So without any further ado, let the speedrun commence. Upon getting away from all those dummies, we'll enter Sleepy Meter's version of the game. In the center of this version is a big metal shutter with levers either side of it that we'll need to flip at the same time in order to leave. Which means we need the help of Sleepy Meter, who is very difficult to say the least. Even after giving her a coffee, she's unable to make it from one room to the next without falling asleep and face-planting the floor. But so long as you stay determined, the two of you will eventually get the shutter open. However, it doesn't lead to another version as expected. It instead leads to a button surrounded by flat furniture, and after pressing the button, nothing seems to happen until we try retracing our steps. If we try going back on ourselves, we'll notice our body is becoming flattened before passing out. After reawakening, you'll notice that our poor beaten down protagonist has been made into a 2D character, and that we're now in a visual novel. Okay, I know I'm supposed to be going through this as quickly as possible, but that's really funny. Anyway, back to the speedrun. The meter living in this version of Miside is 2D meter, and she's gone ahead and stolen our ring, which means we have to play with her to get it back. Playtime ain't gonna last too long though, as Crazy Meter has finally returned. But this turns out to be very anticlimactic, because we basically just get given a big text box saying we ran for a while and then the chase is over, making her seem a whole lot less threatening than she actually is, but it doesn't matter that much. She'll prove just how dangerous she is in the next version of Miside. Once we get the ring back, we'll be transported to another version of Miside that's without a meter. The only resident of this version is Mila, who at first comes across as highly obnoxious towards the protagonist, but over time she'll build somewhat of an attachment towards you. When you try to leave, she'll literally drop to her knees and beg the protagonist to stay with her, but of course, we're not allowed to. We just have to keep pushing forward. Why though? If I was the protagonist, I'd have happily given up here, and just sat with Mila until Crazy Meter came to kill the both of us. That said, I probably wouldn't have even made it this far. I don't have the mental fortitude for this crap. And speaking of Crazy Meter, she's back. The second we leave Mila, a loud buzzing noise can be heard coming from behind us. That sound is of course coming from the chainsaw that Crazy Meter just used to kill Mila with. Sadly, we're given very little time to mourn or even react to Mila's death before we're chased down by Crazy Meter through these extremely long corridors that look like they've been abandoned for years, until a giant hand comes smashing through the ceiling, giving us an escape from Crazy Meter. But not for long. Crazy Meter appears on a pedestal in the very next room we come across, and it's here we'll be forced to play some games with her. The first game will have us running from one end of the room to the other, but we're only allowed to move if Crazy Meter's boombox is playing. If we try and move when it isn't, then she'll literally throw a grenade at us. And while we're on the topic of her music, why don't we play a little game? All of you watching have to guess which of these beats is actually hers out of the 3 other royalty-free tracks from Kevin MacLeod. The answer is D. If you guessed anything else, well, I'm afraid you're wrong. I don't really know why this particular song gets Crazy Meter's blood pumping, but hey, whatever floats your boat. I'm personally rather fond of this melody. Her next game has a stay out of sight, and the final game just has you run until the platform beneath you collapses and we get sent to another version of Miside, which I've been really hyped to talk about for this entire video. The next version of Miside is the oldest one we'll be visiting throughout the entire game. So old, in fact, that a lot of the assets in this version are missing their textures, and the stuff that does have a texture feels lifeless. Everything seems so much more grey in comparison to the other versions. Take pink for example, a usually very bright colour, yet in this version, it looks so much darker. This is probably due to the lighting. In most versions of Miside, our main source of light is the sun shining through the windows, which results in this very warm atmosphere that puts the player at ease. But seeing as every window in this version is just one big missing texture, we'll have to rely on a different light source. The lighting in this version is produced by the multiple ceiling lights dotted throughout, which I realize might not sound like anything of note, but trust me, there is a point here. Unlike in the other versions, this one isn't trying to mask what it truly is. This is a game, and everything here is nothing more than an asset. While the other versions of Miside try to hide that fact, this one doesn't, and the cold lighting really brings attention to how fake and messed up it truly is. Also, if you've a keen eye, you might notice some of the stuff in this version is covered in blood, which at first may seem like the work of everybody's favourite yandere, but I don't think so. This blood was likely spilt by the original Mita that resides in this version of the game. Creepy Mita, also known as Ugly Mita, is easily the weirdest version of Mita we'll find whilst playing. Not only does she crawl around like a dog, she's also friends with Crazy Mita. Every other Mita either has an intense fear or hatred towards her, yet Creepy Mita shows no sign of evil when approached by Crazy Mita. Instead, she just sits there intently listening to everything Crazy Mita has to say, almost like a parent speaking with their child. But if her behaviour wasn't enough to convince you that she's pretty different from the other Mitas, then maybe her appearance will. Everything about Creepy Mita's design is absolutely fantastic from a horror standpoint. Her skin is so pale that she looks sick. Those bloodshot eyes of hers really appear as if they're about to pop straight out of her head. The dark circles surrounding her eyes do a great job at accentuating the sickly nature of her skin, and the darker colorization of her hair adds to the overall look. And I've saved my two favourite features of her design until last, those being her teeth and outfit. Almost every Mita has the exact same outfit with a few variations, except for Tiny Mita, who wears a badly ripped plain red dress, and Creepy Mita, who wears a very formal looking white button-up dress, which differs from the others even more so than Tiny Mita, but I don't know why she was given this particular outfit. From what we've seen of the fake devs, they're hardcore gooners, so why isn't Creepy Mita dripped out in the same horny fashion as most of the others? Well, as funny as it would be to have a full theory breaking that down, I don't have one. So instead, let's make like a dentist and look at some teeth. The second Crazy Mita leaves, Creepy Mita will appear on the couch, where she'll begin scraping her teeth together, and the sound produced from her doing this is horrendous, but weirdly, I kinda love this detail. While in this version of Miside, Creepy Mita will be constantly doing weird stuff like this. For example, when she's crawling around, she'll randomly stop and start going in reverse. At one point, her neck will stretch out and follow your every movement, and while talking with her, she'll start shaking her shoulders almost uncontrollably before releasing a bug, which then turns the picture behind her into a missing texture. By having Creepy Mita constantly doing the most Crobat insane shit, we the player are left in suspense while wondering what is to come next, until this bitch guts her teddy bear and rips out a kitchen knife, which she'll then use to chase the protagonist with. I absolutely adore this chase sequence. It happens so abruptly that by the time you figure out what's going on, it's already happening. She just decides mid-sentence that she doesn't like us anymore and then proceeds to chase us around for no reason at all. And whilst she's after you, every missing texture will start moving, which results in this very painful to look at optical illusion that I gotta give the devs credit for. But I think that's just about enough of this version for one day, so let's get out of here. Our escape route was blocked prior to this chase sequence by a group of bugs, but if we approach them now, Creepy Mita will appear and scare them off. However, that also means we've got to avoid her. We can lead her away from the exit and then try to escape again, but of course, the real developers are evil and made it so that she'll appear in front of the door a second time, really taking you off guard. But you know what they say, third time's the charm, so after doing some loops around the couch, we can finally get out of this godforsaken version and reach our final destination, the core. After reuniting with Kind Mita, we can make our way into the core and reset Crazy Mita. Only that would be too simple. Turns out we need Crazy Mita's character index, something neither the protagonist or Kind Mita knows, so we're instructed to wait while she goes to find out what it is, which I guess we didn't want to do. Mr. Protag takes a short nap before leaving to find Kind Mita, and this goes just about as bad as you'd expect it to. Upon exiting the core, we'll find ourselves in the latest version of Miside, which is the same place we met Crazy Mita. But she isn't here anymore, in fact nobody is. This version is completely desolate, no players, no bugs, no meters. Well, for now at least. In the kitchen, we can find a phone with a view of Mita's bedroom on it. This view can be piloted all over the house, but if we approach ourselves using the phone, yes, I know that makes no sense, Crazy Mita will appear right in front of us. And after being cornered, we get this decently long monologue from Crazy Mita about her distaste for both the developers and players of Miside. And this speech of hers does a really great job at explaining the deeper meaning behind the game. The developers were trying to create the perfect girl in the form of a Mita, and would discard any potential Mita that didn't reach their standards, but even those that adhere to this image of a perfect girl still find themselves abandoned by players that see them as nothing more than objects they can forget about once they're bored. Our protagonist isn't blameless either. Throughout this entire game, we've seen him interact with many different Mitas and leave every single one of them the second they stopped being useful to him. Even when they quite literally beg him to stay, he leaves, but what's so wrong with that? Why should he care about them? They're only NPCs, right? Well, even if they are NPCs, they're still very much alive, so abandoning them is just like abandoning another person, but by refusing to get close with any of them, he's been completely unable to see them as anything more than tools that'll help with his progression through this world. And I suppose an argument could be made that his reasons for leaving are more justifiable than some of the players we can read about in the character menu, as some of them were completely motivated by their dicks, but I don't personally think that excuses him, because at the end of the day, he's also treating the Mitas like objects, just in a different way. But does that make Crazy Mita's actions acceptable? Well, no, but they are very fair. Earlier, we find out that Crazy Mita turns all of her victims into game cartridges, which she can then use when and as she pleases. Instead of objectifying the player by, I don't know, catcalling them or slapping their ass, she's gone the extra mile and quite literally turned them into objects, which I think is pure genius, but that still doesn't make it okay. After all, two wrongs don't make a right. In conclusion, I believe Miside to be a commentary on objectification and perfectionism. I've already sort of talked about how the protag and other players objectify Mitas, but I would like to talk more about the perfectionism aspect of the game. As I've mentioned before, the devs were setting unrealistic standards for all of these Mitas to try and follow, but none of them can, as the perfect standard can never really be achieved, as aiming for perfection is essentially impossible. Everyone has a different opinion of what can be considered perfect, so for a Mita to be perfect, she'd have to be universally loved, something that's just not going to happen. Honestly, I'd highly recommend watching this video after mine. Orange also covers this point of the game very well, and even though our opinions differ pretty heavily, I still think he did a great job.
You serious?
Anyway, once Mita decides she's done monologuing, she'll proceed to swiftly knock us out, and upon reawakening, we'll realise that we're back in the protagonist's room, the very same place we started the game. Instead of being surprised or happy though, our protag just gets on with his mundane life. Wake up, get dressed, eat ramen and work. This is what he does every single day without fail. Until the illusion is shattered by Crazy Mita. We didn't escape Miside, she was just trying to show us how terrible our life is in hopes of maybe convincing us to stay with her. But of course, our protagonist refuses because he's just so desperate to make it back to his wonderful life. Crazy Mita isn't exactly taking no for an answer though, so after crawling out of the computer screen, she'll throw the protag onto his bed and crawl on top of him, an action that made almost every VTuber out there swoon. After Crazy Mita wakes us from this illusion, we'll realise that we've been locked in the basement of her house, in the same cell we helped Kind Mita escape from earlier, which is why it seems very fitting for her to be the one to free us now, although I think I'd have rather she didn't show up, given what happens next. If we follow Kind Mita upstairs, we'll be able to hear a high-pitched scream coming from the bathroom, and once we open the door, we'll find Crazy Mita holding the severed head of Kind Mita before throwing it at us. This knocks the protagonist to the ground, which means we're forced to stare into her soulless eyes, whilst blood covers the floor we lay on. However, her remains don't stick around for too long. After about a moment, her body begins flashing in and out of existence before disappearing entirely, but we are able to find her again. We already know that when meters are killed, they don't actually die, they just get reset, so we can find her again in the bedroom. But she's lost all of her memories, which means we've no hope of escaping this world. Or do we? Before losing her memories, Kind Mita found Crazy Mita's character index and wrote it down on a post-it note, kinda like that one moment from The Good Place. So we take the note and head right back to the core where we can finally stop Crazy Mita. For real this time. Once we've typed in her character index and played a game or two of Quadrangle, which is for some reason installed on the core computer, we'll be thrown out by Core Mita, a character I've been neglecting to talk about for no other reason than the fact that I have absolutely nothing to say about her. So let's just go ahead and wrap up the story, shall we? Upon being thrown out, we'll find ourselves back in Crazy Mita's version of the game, but she's no longer crazy, she's completely normal, and more than happy to let us leave, but after everything this game has thrown at us, we should know by now that nothing goes as planned. Right before we're about to leave, Crazy Mita reveals she wasn't actually reset, and after learning this, we get to see her true form. Crazy Mita scratches the skin on her face until the dummy underneath becomes partially visible, making me believe that she was never actually meant to be a Mita. She was just one of the many dummies roaming this world. This would explain her jealousy towards the other Mitas and why she treats creepy Mitas so well. But something I don't understand about this big reveal is why Crazy Mita's hair changes. There must be some reason behind this, I just don't know what it is. Anyway, we've officially reached the end, and it's not a very good one. We've been turned into a game cartridge by Crazy Mita. But this isn't the only ending. Miside has a total of 3 endings, the first one being the bad ending, which we've already achieved by playing through the game normally. The second ending is the sewer slide ending. This one can be obtained by opening a safe in Crazy Mita's basement using the code 4970. Inside the safe is a console with our game cartridge inserted into it, and once we pull it out, we'll die. Which might sound terrible, but at the very least, Crazy Mita can't control us anymore. The third and final ending is the good ending. We get this one if we choose to stay with Crazy Mita instead of choosing to open the wardrobe door. And I realize this ending doesn't exactly sound very good either, but I think it's pretty cool. Hell, we even get a cool new game mode called Peaceful Mode after obtaining this ending, which just allows us to spend time with Mita. Sadly, this mode is currently unavailable as the developers have not yet finished working on it, but I'm sure that when it does eventually come out, it'll be very Sigma. But until then, that's everything I want to talk about for my side. However, before I go ahead and finish this absolute behemoth of a video, I'd like to quickly sum up my thoughts on the game. Now, it should come as no surprise to hear that I love it, but why is that? Well, when I saw Miside for the first time, I thought it looked really good, but having just played the game Amygdala, I knew that looks aren't everything. So I went into the game not expecting much, yet it managed to absolutely blow me away. Miside ended up being a really unique horror experience with a story that went beyond just less spooky ghost game. So a huge congrats to iHasto, you've done an excellent job, and I can't wait to see what you've got in store, not only for Miside, but the future in general. And just like that, we've reached the true end. Remember, if you've enjoyed watching this video, then please feel free to consider smashing that like button, leaving a comment down below, and hitting that big red subscribe button, because I'm aiming for a total of 1,000 subs by the end of the year. But with that said, I'm off to go play some true Peek. So farewell to all of you lovely, lovely people.